Good evening. Welcome to Community Matters and tonight's conversation, The Valley Votes, What to Expect Next. I'm Mahoning Matters editor Mark Sweetwood. I'm going to be your host tonight. I'm here in the beautiful Stanbaugh once again. This time I have a few folks joining me, so we expect a lively discussion, kind of a fun night tonight, and at least hopefully informative about the issues that I think everyone's kind of thinking about as we get within 2 weeks of Election Day. I'd like to thank our partners tonight, the Stanbaugh folks, the Joanne Stock, Chief Development Officer at Stanbaugh Auditorium, her awesome team, both for their technical prowess and their hospitality that make all this look wonderful, and we're really happy to have them with us once again. We thank you for joining us wherever you are. You can join us live on the live stream on the YouTube page for Stanbaugh, on the Facebook page for Mahoning Matters, and also the new digital concert hall smart app that the Stanbaugh has unveiled just in the last couple of weeks, actually. If you have a question, especially on the Facebook page, at the bottom you can leave us a message, and Shay and Jeremy from our staff will be looking at that, and they'll relay those to me so I can share them with you. Tonight's Community Matters discussion is really part of Mahoning Matters' ongoing mission. It's our commitment to, people in the Valley to talk about the issues and try to illuminate a little bit as we can, especially those issues that matter the most to all of you. And if you are, supportive of the journalism that Mahoning Matters brings you, not just like at events like this, but every day on MahoningMatters.com, and if you feel like making a monthly contribution to our journalism, we'd appreciate it. You can find a link at MahoningMatters.com. In less than 2 weeks, America will finish voting. We're kind of confident that we're going to have an election day, but we may not have an answer until election week this year. But we're going to decide everything from local races to who's going to occupy the White House for the next 4 years. And while there's every expectation that in a pandemic we won't have all the votes figured out immediately on election night, the polls close and everything has to be properly postmarked and reviewed by some of the officials you'll meet tonight. But we hope to have a good idea by November 3rd of what is happening, who's won at least our local races. In preparation for events like this in August, Mahoning Matters, we sort of surveyed our staff. We wanted to know our audience. We wanted to know what are those things that you find important. We were told a lot of things. Ethics in government is important to the voters this year. Healthcare, economic development, voting rights, coronavirus, jobs and employment, racism, local education, immigration, transparency. And so we may not hit all those topics tonight, but we're going to do our very best to kind of illuminate some of the candidates and the issues that you are mostly concerned about. The other thing that you told us is you want to see the candidates and the issues in easy to find information like voter guides, which you can find at the MahoningMatters.com if you look at the top of the screen. We've worked on voters guides and we're updating those with stories about the candidates. We went through every levy in Mahoning, Trumbull, and Columbiana County. And right there, if you want to know what's going to affect you, if you're a homeowner of the roughly $100,000 home, you can determine how much that levy is going to affect you. So with all of that in mind, we've really sort of put together a great panel, and we're very grateful for the panel that's joining us tonight, both here at the Stanbaugh and remotely, and the candidates. Tonight we'll have 3 breakout sessions. We were looking at the presidential race, the 13th congressional race, and the race for the next Mahoning County prosecutor. And so those candidates or their surrogates will be here tonight joining us, and we expect that to be enlightening as well. We've instructed them, these are not debates tonight. I'm no Chris Wallace, so we kind of know how to turn mics off if things get too wild. I don't think that's going to be an issue. But instead, these are going to be 10-minute joint conversations in which we, the idea is looking at the last couple of weeks and allowing candidates to make a really good pitch as to, what they want those who haven't placed their votes yet to think about and as they head to the polls. And that actually brings us to our first breakout segment of the night. We are going to discuss the presidential race. And as much as we'd like to have, Mr. Trump and or Mr. Biden joining us, we instead have their surrogates. Gino DeFabio is a Trump surrogate. And you've seen Gino everywhere from Fox News to MSNBC. He also shared the stage with President Trump. He's a lifelong Valley Democrat who turned Trump supporter in 2016. And for the past 27 years, he's been employed at City Machine Technologies of Youngstown. He'll be fronting his candidate, President Trump, tonight. On the Democrat side, we have Michael Morley, who's a Biden surrogate. And Michael's an attorney and business and political advocate. He has had a history steeped in Valley politics. Most recently in 2019, he was the national campaign advisor for Tim Ryan's presidential campaign. He is a graduate of YSU and the University of Cincinnati College of Law. He's also, I understand, a member of the United States Screen Actors Guild, so I don't know whether that makes him more or less qualified to be on our stage tonight at the Stambaugh. As all of these discussions start with candidates, I wanted to begin with a question to each of them. And if there's a format, what we're going to do tonight is whoever the incumbent is will answer the first question. There'll be a follow-up, and then we'll let the challenger go first then. But my main question, with less than 2 weeks ago before the election, for all of those voters who have yet to make up their minds, what is your best 2-minute pitch? We'll start with Gino. Gino, people out there planning to show up on Election Day, what is your best 2-minute pitch for your candidate, President Trump?
Well, first, I want to say thanks for having me tonight, Mark, and the organization. It's a great opportunity to tell the community what the community thinks. You know, with less than 2 weeks to go before the election, the Democrats and Joe Biden have a lot to answer for. Joe Biden stated on numerous occasions that he will ban fracking. In this valley, the importance of fracking is immeasurable. The jobs that have been created and plants like Valorec have been built would be gone. This isn't the first time the Democrats have threatened jobs in Ohio. Joe Biden and the party have supported NAFTA since 1994. Ohio alone lost 305,000 jobs through 2016. NAFTA would still be killing Ohio jobs if it weren't for President Trump. His USMCA was a major win for Ohio's workers, and it will be instrumental in rebuilding Ohio's economy. President Trump has always been transparent in his promises to the American people. His first term is a testament to his ability to keep his word and fight for all Americans. The difference between the two candidates couldn't be more clear. President Trump believes that blue lives and all lives matter. Donald Trump supports fully funding our police and keeping the American people safe. Joe Biden would defund our brave law enforcement. Trump wants to cut the payroll taxes, boosting workers' take-home pay. Joe Biden has promised tax increases. Donald Trump is negotiating fair trade deals to protect American jobs. I believe Joe Biden would be a puppet to the countries like China. Donald Trump wants to increase the American manufacturing by giving Made in America tax credits. He wants to expand opportunity zones that benefit our poorest of communities. He wants to continue his deregulatory agenda for energy independence. He is keeping his word to the American people that a vaccine will be completed by year's end. He's holding radical groups like Antifa accountable for the violence and hate that and divide they create. And he strongly supports the Second Amendment and the right to life. In 47 months, Donald Trump has delivered on promises made and promises kept. I will take another 4 years of Trump rather than a Biden administration that's been an empty slate for 47 years in politics. Making America great again wasn't just Trump's slogan, it was his task. And it's what he does for the American people every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Gino. Mike, we'll go to you. What is your best 2-minute pitch?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mark, for the opportunity to be here. Beautiful auditorium. Gino, it's a pleasure to be with you on stage. I think it's impossible to forget that an election that is following someone's 4-year term is about that person's 4-year term. So I think it would be fair to say that if we look back on these last 4 years, we've seen a failed effort to do anything about the healthcare crisis in the United States, an effort to roll back Obamacare, which would necessarily make it impossible for people with pre-existing conditions to get health care. It would certainly be another failed 4 years in terms of job creation. That hasn't happened. Tax cuts for the wealthy, I think, have been inappropriately favoring the wealthy and not the working people of this country. Ultimate President Biden has no intention to ban fracking. He's made that very clear, or to defund the police. That's an effort to deflect what's really going on, and that is for people to decide whether or not Donald Trump deserves another 4 years. I think he doesn't. Joe Biden will have a fair tax plan, a jobs plan. He will do something that Donald Trump promised to do 4 years ago and didn't, and that is create a solution to the country's healthcare crisis. And I think he will be someone who will pay attention to the needs of people like us who live in the Mahoning Valley. So I think Donald Trump does not deserve to be president again, and I believe that Joe Biden does in fact deserve to be president. He served the country well during his career, and I think he's well equipped to be the president of the United States.
Thank you, Michael. As a follow-up question, both of you touched on it briefly, but let's put a finer point on it. We're talking about the coronavirus and we're talking about jobs, and their two are kind of hand in hand. I don't think unless we figure out a way to get out of the pandemic, we're not really going to be able to get back on track in terms of jobs. But there seems to be a confusion among American people about items like masks. And you get the impression when you watch a Trump rally that some people aren't wearing masks. A lot of them aren't. And we look at and Biden has actually been doing more virtual. People call him Basement Biden. He's been sort of not exactly on tour. So two things. Help me understand that when Americans are looking for guidance on the coronavirus, should they take their cues from the president or should they take them from the CDC? And in either case, which candidate has the better plan for job creation post-pandemic? I'll start with Michael. We'll go first. Sorry.
Okay, great. Well, I don't think that anyone can reasonably say that the country's response to the COVID pandemic has been a success. I think over 75% of the people believe that. Certainly most Democrats, a significant number of Republicans. Donald Trump lied to the American people. He knew exactly that there was a huge issue in early February. He went on television in late February and absolutely just fabricated stories and just lied, and 230,000 people are now dead. So he's failed us there. I believe that, in answer to your question, will President Biden listen to the CDC and to science? Indeed he will. He's going to listen to the scientists, listen to the experts, listen to the doctors. There's a reason why the New England Medical Association recently, that has never endorsed a presidential candidate in history, endorsed Joe Biden, specifically because of the failed response to the pandemic. And as recently as today, USA Today, which again has never endorsed a candidate for president of the United States, endorsed Biden today. We just can't take this anymore. It's been a nightmare, and that has to stop.
Gino?
Thank you. Mike, have you watched the news the last 4 years and you're surprised these people are endorsing your candidate? I want to go back for a minute what Mike said about the virus and the unemployment. Before the China virus hit, there were more blacks employed than ever in this country. There was more Hispanics, more women. We had more jobs in this country than we had people before the virus hit. That was President Trump's record on jobs. I mean, I don't know how we forget that in a short amount of time. We got away from it, probably because we're watching the news and they don't get it right anyhow. As far as the virus itself, how he handled it, when the virus started, nobody knew what it was. President Trump shut the country down. You say, listen to the CDC. Of course, you get expert advice from everybody. We all can't be an expert on everything. President Trump's not the expert. The World Health Organization told him one thing. The CDC would say something. The next week it was something else. As a president, he has to take responsibility. He can't go hide in his basement and hope somebody fixes this. Well, he got a lid on everything because he's worried about something. He gets out there and does it. And that's exactly what he did. Before one person in this country was diagnosed, and Lord knows before one person died, the president shut down the hottest economy we ever had, closed the borders to our neighbors and friends, and said, let's see what we have here. We have to fix this. All the while the Democrats like Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco saying, come to San Francisco, we're all fine here. Fauci was saying, I don't see this as being a problem. How do the Democrats forget everything that they saw? I mean, it can't make it go away. Everyone said it was nothing. Don't worry about it. And Trump shut the country down. And now they want to change history, which they can't do anymore with the advent of the internet and the YouTube and everything else. Mike, we know what they said. We know what the president did. We know he built hospital ships. We know he provided PPE. He started the Defense Production Act. He had auto companies building respirators. He did it. It was a Herculean effort on the part of our military and our president and a task force to save lives, Mike. That's the true story. That's what really happened.
And that's 2 minutes. And
thank you.
Thank you, Gino, and thank you, Mike. Although I will take some umbrage at about not trusting the news media. I'm still in the news media there, Gino. So I'm not
we just met. When we become friends,
I'm not going to let you exactly get away with that. But thank you very much. I do appreciate that conversation. And if you're looking for more information, head to both candidates' websites have a wealth of information, and MahoningMatters.com. We're covering the story too, and we do appreciate these gentlemen joining us tonight, hashing out their viewpoints. Hopefully, we've gotten some people out there talking. I'm going to switch track now. I'm going to our next segment, and we are really, really, really sort of fortunate. Two of the panelists, Dr. Paul Sarasic, who's a professor, political science professor at YSU, joined us in September, our last program, as did Tom McCabe, who's deputy director of the Mahoning County Board of Elections. They're here tonight again, and I thank them very much for joining us again. And added to the list this time, chosen by the way, the League of Women Voters in Trumbull County. I said, who would be a good representative for our panel tonight? And Ron Mazzullo, who's the deputy director of the Trumbull County Board of Elections, is here tonight. And I thought I'd just begin real quickly by asking you gentlemen, where do things stand right now? I'll start with Ron. They went to Tom. All right. Sorry, it's my fault. I'll start with Ron. We're curious as to what is going on in the polling places right now. What have in-person crowds been like? If you have a sense what the numbers look like from early voting and from absentee ballots, we'd love to hear about what's going on there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation here. Mahoning Matters, I look at it every single morning. In Trumbull County, we decided to not have our early voting at the Board of Elections. We utilized a vacated bank building next door. It's worked out wonderful with teller stations where our clerks are, and they're moving people through there very quickly and also in a safe manner. When I left the office to come here to Stambaugh Auditorium, we had 9,300 plus people had already voted since October 6th. That number in itself is real close to the total number of people that voted in 2016. Wow. Early voted at the building, yes. We have mailed out shy of 42,000 ballots to people as per their requests. We've already received back near 22,000 of those ballots. That exceeds the total number of 2016. So we're looking at 240, 250% turnout compared to the numbers of 2016. And I'm sure my colleague from Mahoning County has very similar numbers. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, we do.
Well, let's check in with Tom. How is that going on over there, colleague Tom?
We're sure we're well up from what we saw in 2016. So far, we have 49,165 absentee requests compared to 4 years ago when it was about 28,000, 29,000. So we're 20,000 above what we saw 4 years ago. And at the early vote so far, as of the end of the day, we're probably closer to 10,000. And we did a total of 12,000 4 years ago in 16. We still have 2 weeks left. Yeah. And so with the 2 weekends coming up, 2 full weeks, the rest of this week until 6, next week until 7, we're expecting, already it's record breaking what we've done with the early vote.
And Paul, when we were doing this show back in September, we were kind of guessing at, maybe there'd be some sort of historical precedence. But now we're sort of seeing, some of those come to life. What are you, as you watch these numbers here and you see similar numbers throughout the state, what are you able to glean? What kind of precedent are we looking at? And what does someone in your position tell from this?
Well, I mean, really don't look national now. You've heard the word numbers. But nationally, I think we're looking at historic hold on a second here, getting feedback. But an historic election, we might be sort of at a record number of turnout. I think I read the other day that there are 34 million people who have already voted.
Wow.
That's about 25% of the total for 2016. So it really is, I think, a kind of study what we're looking at. We had a record turnout in 2018, and it looks like, as mentioned, we could hit 150 million people voting this year. And in comparison, it was about 138 million in 2016. So we really are looking at, I think, historic turnout numbers.
And what's interesting too, when you look nationally too, it's not just people who are mailing in the ballots. You see people in Georgia standing in line for 8 hours. You see people really kind of, looking forward to voting. There's a little more zest in voting this time. Do you think that's across the board? Or is it too early to lean into, and I'll ask these gentlemen because I have some more specific local information, but when you see that sort of reaction, what is that telling us about outcome, or is this telling us about enthusiasm? Paul. Yeah, I think harder, and I think it's going to be harder and longer. I mean, it not only will it's going to be hard for us to anticipate what the outcome is going to be, but it's also going to take longer for us to maybe drill down unless there is some sort of runaway leader here. And I'll go to Tom next. What is the sense at the Mahoning County Board of Elections? When people are voting, are you seeing a trend among more registered Democrats, more registered Republicans? Are you at that meta level of detail yet? What are some of the insights you're gleaning from the early part of this?
What we've seen so far is a heavier Democrat turnout, and of course we get that in Mahoning County because it's a Democrat county. The early numbers coming out were about 3-1 Democrat to Republican, with unregistered voters, those non-affiliated voters in between those Democrats and Republicans. But that's not unusual because we saw those record numbers in 2016 as well. And it tends in Mahoning County that you're going to see a heavier Democrat vote earlier, where later on election day you're going to see a heavier Republican vote from your suburbs and your rural areas.
Ron, or is that a similar vision of what you're seeing in
our numbers fall akin with Mahoning County all the time. I mean, our numbers usually stay right on line, the difference being a 10% volume. Mahoning has a higher volume. I found something interesting in Paul saying, leaning towards a monumental turnout, though. I happen to agree. Turnout was mid 69% in Trumbull in 16. I foresee the potential of it actually being closer to 75% or more. Which is a comforting note in preparation, because I had mentioned how many ballots we have in the office right now. If we get the 42,000 that have been requested, and we're going to vote over 20,000 our early vote center, we're only going to see 103,000 people vote in Trumbull County, and that's at the level of 75%, Paul. So that basically, you subtract it out, you're talking mid-50s plus of the ballots already being in the building before November 3rd. That leaving 40-some thousand to actually vote at our 55 locations. And that's a positive note, and I'm sure Tom feels the same way. This is something that's going to be at the polls akin to a governor's race, possibly. So it's going to make for a calmer November 3rd because the ballots will already be cast and in the building prior to.
And short of another run of more people showing up than you expect, because I know we've gotten a lot of reader questions going into tonight, and a lot of the questions have been about do I have to wear a mask? Some of the same questions we saw in September. I know we went over some of these things. Am I going to wear a mask? Are people going to be socially distant? Are each ballot place going to be clean in between voters? I'll start with you again, Ron. What should people? Because I know you have a different setup this year in Trumbull County. You're using the bank building next door. So answer some of those questions. What's social distancing look like? Are masks going to be enforced? And what's the cleanup going to be in between?
Right. Well, I'll touch the mask conversation right off the bat. The Secretary LaRose has given us signage and signage suggestions of encouraging masks by all voters. Ironically, nobody can force a voter to wear a mask, though. And we're not going to be doing so. We're going to have masks there, surgical masks, if they would like one. But if not, we're going to give them their right of voting. Regarding the social distancing aspect of our early vote center, we're utilizing a bank building. We had some vinyl templates, stick-ons. I had about 1,000 of them made, and we have them at the bank, and they're set 6 foot apart on the ground. We're going to be using those in all 55 locations. What we're doing at the early vote center, we're going to emulate in every one of the 55 locations, and that is cleaning from stylist that they use to sign the poll books to clean pens when they're filling in the ovals on the ballots. Every privacy booth will be cleansed immediately after a voter and, of course, prior to. And we've been doing that at the early vote center, and it's worked out extremely well. We've been charged by the Secretary to have an ample supply of poll workers, maybe a little bit over the top, but nonetheless, we're going to utilize some of those in every one of the locations as cleaners, and they're getting trained to be poll workers too. So we're looking at that from that aspect. It's going to be a clean environment when voters go out to vote on November 3rd.
Yeah, Tom?
No, I think Ron answered that pretty good. We've been following those state guidelines that Frank LaRose set up for us. The early vote's going well. We're keeping everything clean, people distanced. And so exactly what Ron said, we had guidelines to follow. I think each board across the state of Ohio is following those guidelines. And I think voters can be assured that when they show up that there'll be proper precautions taken.
The irony of the mask question, though, and I forgot about this, and that is we haven't had one person vote out of these 9,300 and change when I left.
Really?
Not wear a mask.
That's good.
In our vote center.
We've had a couple.
Yeah,
we've had a couple.
Starting with Tom, what are the current what are the longest wait times you've experienced in Mahoning County?
Well, we're seeing the longest waits we've had so far came early on the first and second day. Since then, the line's moving pretty quick. We can process between 120 and 140 voters per hour through the early vote center, and that's helping. At most in the last few days, about 20 minutes to half an hour of voters waiting. It goes real fast. We have that new system. It's a hybrid system of paper, electronic. And so, we're encouraging people. If you want to vote, we're open till 6 o'clock this week. I believe Saturday is 8 to 4, Sundays 1 to 5. Next week we'll be open till 7 o'clock at night. And then, of course, the following weekend before election will be the same hours of Saturday and Sunday. And so there's still plenty of time for voters to come out and cast those ballots early at the Board of Election. And there's really no reason. It's simple, it's easy, and the line's moving fast.
I want to get in a couple of reader questions. I've gotten a few inquiries this week about how we look in terms of, are we caught up with mailing absentee ballots? One reader wrote to us and said, I mailed in my request for an absentee ballot September 16th. I called the Trumbull County Board of Elections earlier this week wondering when I would get my ballot and was told they were just mailing them out. This was an email from last week, Ron. If I should not get my absentee ballot in time to return before the election, can I go ahead and vote in person, or am I on an absentee ballot list and will not be allowed to?
Is that question's pointed at me? Yeah, I
Trumbull
can
County, yep.
address that. That voter definitely got their ballot already. I mentioned 42,000 requests. Out of that 42,000, 41,500 or so have already been at the houses. We have about 500 that haven't been mailed as of yet, and they'll be going out tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday, which brings us right up to the money with every single request getting a ballot in the mail. The other thing that I kind of looked down upon was this ballot tracker that was provided through the state. It showed a date of mailing every ballot, October 6th. And that gave a facade to the voters that were actually looking at that, because it's impossible for us to mail that many ballots in one day. We were able to mail out a bunch on October 6th because we were prepared to do that. And I know, Tom, they were in Mahoning County. And we sent out the bulk then, but then it takes a processing time to get it correct, to make sure that the voter's getting the proper ballot, et cetera. And the ballot tracker, it gave a false hope that people were getting their ballot. It's unfortunate.
So when people are getting this note saying it was mailed out October 6th, that was the first day of ballot eligibility, I believe.
That is correct.
And so that was sort of a stock answer that the state gave.
It was a stock answer, and it was unfortunate because that's what people saw when they looked at it.
Has anyone heard how the post offices are doing? Are you getting any feedback or?
Well, so far we've had service with the post office. We keep in contact with the downtown Youngstown post office about once a day, sometimes twice a day. We have stories of ballots that went out Friday and Saturday, have arrived on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week. So I think the post office, they're doing a great job for us here in the Valley. I have to say, though, some voters were a little concerned because we did have a snafu with a third-party vendor called Midwest Direct. Mahoning County used them, I believe counties in the state used them, Cuyahoga, Stark, Summit, Lucas, and there was a delay on some ballots. So when voters were calling us, there was some concern on our part that those ballots had not been mailed yet. And so, but...
Yeah, I want to ask a question about that. Is Tom's mic working? No. Your head up. Your mic went out, Tom, so I did have a follow-up question on that one. I'll jump to another reader question for Ron while we get you situated, sir. Let's see, where should I go? Which one should I do? I'm confused about poll watchers. Can anyone be one? Do you have to declare a party? Is there such a thing as independent poll watchers?
Okay, poll watchers. I'm hoping that's not poll workers.
It says watchers.
It says watchers. Poll watchers, poll workers, we always open up our doors for poll workers, and every county and state does the same. When it comes to poll watchers, and Tom's longevity in the election business can come in handy, but poll watchers, or as they're termed, observers, if you're talking inside of polling locations, right, or having the ability to be in different locations,
right.
Those are forms that are sent to us, and they're done basically from the parties or a group of candidates, and I believe it to be 5 or more, Tom, and correct me, please. Yeah. They're done by parties, and those are done in advance of not only the election, but we receive those forms well in advance of even early voting. So we know who the observers will be, and we can let our poll workers know that such and such a person has the ability to observe in the polling locations. But that gets done through the parties or a group of candidates.
And I think there's some mythology that people can just wake up on November 3rd and say, I'm going to go watch so to answer the person's specific question, though, it's handled through the two major parties. There's really probably no then such thing as an independent poll watcher.
That is correct. Yeah, I don't believe there's an independent party in the state of Ohio.
Right. So to answer the reader's question, you'll have to work through your local party. They construct that. We're having some technical difficulties. Tom, back up? Guess not. I'm going to jump ahead just real quickly to
Ironically, it's usually my mic that gets turned off. You know?
Speaking of Paul, real quickly before we get into our next segment, one of the reader questions we got was, let's say that November 3rd happens, and the 4th and 5th and 6th happens, and all the ballots clear the decks, and we don't have a clear electoral college winner. Quickly, what is the next step? What happened? What is the next thing that people should be watching for?
Well, you know, first of all, it's going to be counting, right? It's going to take place afterward.
Right.
And different states are going to count different rates. The windows are different state by state. In Ohio, 10 days. In Pennsylvania, with the Supreme Court decision that just came down, 3 days. So the timing is going to be different in each state. In the end, everything's heading towards December 14th. And December 14th, that's when the electors need to go to Columbus, Ohio, and their state capitals around the United States to cast their vote. Now, if there are sort of disputes about the vote totals, then there's going to be some confusion about who the actual electors are. We have a federal law on this from the 1880s, talking about how to deal with multiple slates of electors, because what those electors are going to do is cast their ballots on we sent on to Washington, D.C. The next day after December 14th is January 6th. That's when, under the Constitution, we open up the ballots account. And Vice President Pence, as President of the Senate, will do that. There are questions about how much discretion he will have, particularly if we have multiple electoral votes sent from the states. So what we're hoping for is that prior to December 14th, we have clarity. It is clear which candidate won in each state. If we don't have clarity, then we're going to be in for some trouble, because unfortunately, the congressional statute that governs what you do in the event of a disputed election is itself in dispute.
Oh.
Because the statute is not very clear, and there is a question about whether Congress has the power under Article 1, Section 8 to pass the statute in question. So we'll be looking at multiple court challenges. We hope we can avoid all this. Interestingly enough, if these things do happen, the actual country court are going to be able to have a seat, because probably the foremost election law expert in the country is fully down at state, where it's the law.
Huh.
So they'll have to see what happens moving forward.
Well, we're just going to come to you. I think that's you're closer, so we're going to rely on you. Should something like that happen? And I just, as a point of clarification, so the votes are cast November 3rd. They're counted as by legally when they're allowed to, especially the absentee votes. The canvassing of votes, that is probably the next big key date, November 24th. Am I correct on that?
They moved it up.
They moved it up.
They moved it up.
We just got moved up a little bit. So
what is it?
I believe it to be 18 days. Does that make sense, Tom?
Yeah, it does make days.
We got a new directive on
yeah.
that within the last 2 days, actually.
That's what I get for going to the Secretary of State's website. Thanks. We're going to move on to our next segment. We are very, very kind of excited tonight because we have two outstanding candidates for Ohio's 13th Congressional District, and we have them, one here live and one out campaigning via Zoom. And so we're going to get the same format as we followed earlier with Gino and Mike. I want to introduce to our audience who's with us tonight. Tim Ryan is our incumbent. He's an 18-year veteran in the 13th Congressional seat, where he serves as a member of the powerful House Appropriations Committee and is co-chairman of the Congressional Manufacturing Caucus. In recent years, he's also made a run for president, and he tried to unseat Speaker Nancy Pelosi after the 2018 elections. His opponent, challenger Republican, is Christina Hagan. She's joining us via Zoom. Christina is the third generation. changed your intro and I printed it out later. I'm sorry, Christina. She's third generation, live on a family farm. She's a former member of the Ohio House of Representatives for the 50th District. And in 2016, she was elected chair of the Electoral College in Ohio for President Trump. And I screwed up part of your bio, and I'm really sorry. But you're also part of the 30 under 30. Correct me on that one, Christina. Help me out.
Sure, we are recognized by Forbes for our work on economic development as one of their 30 under 30 for our work in law and policy.
Don't blame Brian for that. That's totally on me. So we are. Well, you got him. You can blame him, but he actually got that to me, and it just didn't get on my sheet. So we're gonna go ahead.
We just wanted to make sure that we moved or off of the family farm a long time ago, but for some reason people keep saying that.
All right, sorry about that. So we'll begin this with the incumbent first, and our question is kind of the same as the presidential one, with less than 2 weeks to go before the election. For all of those voters who haven't made up their mind, and as you hear these gentlemen, it sounds like maybe about half of them locally, who haven't even cast their vote yet. What is your best 2-minute pitch? We'll start with Congressman Ryan.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with Mahoning Matters, and thanks for all you're doing for local journalism. We think this is very, very important. You know, we started with a game plan in Northeast Ohio, and we've been trying to execute that game plan, and we are now on the verge of leading the new energy revolution. I've been able to use my position on the Appropriations Committee. Next year, I'll be the vice chair of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, which controls about $790 billion in government spending. And we've been able to use that position for investments in this community to try to diversify our economy, whether we were in Akron and we were talking about the rubber industry, or in the Valley talking about the steel industry. The goal has been, how do we diversify the economy? How do we get into new industries that are growing by leaps and bounds, creating millions of jobs? And now all you have to do is you have to drive through Lordstown, Ohio, where I was yesterday. You will see the explosion of job creation in our community. You'll see a liquid natural gas power plant where we had over 1,000 building and construction trade workers there. You'll see the General Motors battery plant being constructed right now, $2.3 billion. It's got about 300 construction trade workers there now, and that's going to be 1,100 full-time jobs. TJX out there in Lordstown, cutting-edge logistics facility. Hundreds of construction workers working out there now, 1,100 full-time jobs. And the Endurance, Lordstown Motors, which is going to be an amazing company that's going to grow into thousands of jobs here in this community right in Lordstown. We have 2 incubators. One is the leading business software incubator in the world as of 2 years ago. The recent energy incubator in Warren that's created 500 jobs already and has drawn $250 million in investment. We can go through the whole list of other things that I've brought back, but just to say we've diversified the economy, we are moving into the new economy, and we're going to dominate the new energy revolution right here in Eastern Ohio.
Thank you, Tim. Christina, same question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am so proud to be here tonight and just speak to you directly. I am a proud working class mother. I'm a daughter, sister, and wife to the skilled trades. I was actually raised in the same family business that my grandfather started, going on service calls, working alongside my brothers and my husband. I've actually apprenticed in the skilled trades, and I've worked no less than 2 to 3 jobs my entire life. So I guess what I bring to the table is an extremely, extremely dedicated work ethic. I believe that we need an advocate and a fighter in Washington, D.C. And Tim has talked about a lot of economic development, but when I asked him about the jobs on the debate stage, he said they are coming. It's been 18 long years under his leadership, and I think that there's never been a more appropriate time for change. We have an excellent president who has led the way economically, giving us the strongest economy that we've had in the history of my life, and I'd like to see that coupled with legislative leadership. I don't believe that professionals walk out of State of the Unions. I don't believe that professionals attack our men and women in blue. I think that we need a leader in office who reflects our working class values and is going to work every single day to create jobs in this district. Tim's also talking about becoming a vice chair. I was the vice chair of Energy and Natural Resources I think by my second term, my third year in public service in the state legislature, I was immediately a leader, immediately helping to lead the discussion. But what I never did was take credit for the jobs that were created in our district. I did come alongside our entrepreneurs, our investors, and did everything that I could to cut taxes, cut regulations, make it easier for them to do business in the state of Ohio. That's why I was recognized by Forbes 30 Under 30 for my work in our economic recovery in the state of Ohio. We were dealt massive budget deficits, and I never had a tough time cutting against unnecessary spending to ensure that businesses could flourish in the state of Ohio. So as somebody who came from small business, who has a degree in business, who's raising 3 children in this area, a woman who was born in Alliance, Ohio in the district, I've already represented constituents, all of those that are encompassed in the Stark County, one of 5 counties that are in this district. I would be honored to go and serve and fight for you in Washington, D.C., and ensure that our children have a future here. Quite honestly, that's the reason I'm engaged in this race. I believe that we can be an economic powerhouse. I believe that we can be the main source and exporter of natural gas. We are energy independent because President Trump demanded it and delivered it.
I hate to interrupt you.
I will never forget.
All right.
You're fine. I apologize. I know originally you guys said 5 minutes. I'm not sure where we are, but I'm sure you'll throw us questions, and I'm happy to speak to those.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you for. I'm going to let you go first on the follow-up questions, Christina, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Rita wrote in and says, I'm curious, Christina Hagan, who's running against Tim Ryan, claims in her TV ad she has the backing of first responders. I, for one, would like to know what first responders are on her bandwagon.
So I am happy to speak to you about why I wear this fire engine red. It's because my husband is a firefighter. My brothers are firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, who run alongside SWAT teams who are both volunteer and professional firefighters. So I'm pretty sure they're in my corner. But I have been on the ground with police and fire. After my opponent penned a letter to AG Barr, disparaging the brave men and women in blue, people were coming to me in floods wanting to support my candidacy. But since then, I've spoken to them about the policy that I carried in the state legislature. I carried legislation to increase civil immunity of those who serve in law enforcement, to make it easier for them to bust Johns, make it easier for them to work across local jurisdictions, and make it easier for them to deal with prescription drug abuse. I've worked aggressively to be a friend, an advocate of firefighters. I fought for firefighters who are battling cancer. It was because of my work in the legislature alongside Senator Patton that we were able to get presumptive care for firefighters. We have the backing of my alliance, FOP, the community that I have most directly served. That lodge has endorsed my candidacy. There are 3 others that are in the pike that have voted on or are pushing through, including Tim's hometown in Niles, Warren, and also Boardman, who are in the process of supporting my candidacy, some of which have already cut a check to my campaign. So those are just a few to name. I also, Nate Durig is a local firefighter who stopped me when I was out at Bernard's, and we were at the nursery and he was speaking. He said, hey, internally I'm talking to guys, and there are 30 some guys on our department, 27 of them are voting for you. So I think it's pretty straightforward. The commercials are nasty. They're attacking me over a vote that I took 10 years ago when I was barely in public office. Had I been given the opportunity to vote on that bill, I would vote against it today. But Congressman Tim Ryan voted to strip the civil immunity of our brave men and women in law enforcement a matter of weeks ago, during historically the most difficult time that our safety services have ever seen, when cities are being burnt to the ground. My oldest brother is going to Columbus, where our state house was breached, and he's serving alongside our professionals, our medical professionals, and people are breaking the windows of safety service vehicles. You better bet that I am the candidate that is behind them, that is beside them, that is praying for them, is going to fight for them every single day of the year, and will permanently be behind them and beside them for all of my career.
I appreciate that, and thank you for the answer, and we thank the reader for writing up the question, too. Congressman Ryan, the reader writes in and says, Tim Ryan missed a lot of time and votes when he was running for president. Shouldn't he have been working in the Valley? Will you run for president again?
No. Just to kind of go back on what Christina was saying, there was a vote in the state legislature when she was in. It was called Senate Bill 5. I think the police, the fire, the teachers, the nurses will all remember that. That bill was to gut collective bargaining for police, fire, teachers, and nurses. Christina Hagan voted for that bill. So you can't parade yourself around 10 years later saying, I'd have voted differently. She had an opportunity to back the blue. She didn't. Christina, I didn't interrupt you. It's one thing to be rude on stage. It's another thing all the way from wherever you are.
Everyone.
You voted for gutting
just stop.
collective bargaining.
Take a breath. Everyone just stop. We're really not going to do the back and forth. So if everyone could just.
I want to make sure we're clear on.
And if, Tim, if you can go back to though and discuss the missing votes and direct to the.
I most certainly will. But I just want to be clear, Mark, that she voted to gut collective bargaining for the police, voted to gut the local government fund.
I'll answer my question.
And I will. And so yes, I did. My problem has been that the Democratic Party in many instances did not represent the interests of working class people, especially those in the industrial Midwest. So I am not going to apologize for running for president to try to get attention on our community that has been left behind from trade deals, globalization, automation, and all of these other things. And if you heard what I talked about while I was on the debate stage, I've taken on my party. I've taken on Nancy Pelosi. I've taken on Bernie Sanders. I am one of the most bipartisan people in the entire Congress. Georgetown University says that I'm in the top 5% of the most bipartisan people in the entire Congress, and my opponent can't separate herself from the leader of her party. I think independently, and I will just say, the Republican that ran against her in the primary, that came in second in every county, endorsed me. That shows you how extreme my opponent is on so many issues, whether it's anti-vaccination or extreme on the life issue or extreme on all these other issues.
And your time is up as well.
The bottom line is we brought a lot of attention, and everything I talked about on the debate stage is happening in Lordstown, Ohio right now.
I thank both of you, and I appreciate this spirited conversation. I hope that helps voters back home. And again, if you have questions, ideas, they're both on the campaign trail. You might run into them, but you can also at both of their websites, you'll find lots of information, a lot of policy positions. And Christina, we thank you for joining us virtually. Congressman Ryan, we appreciate you joining us here at the Stand-By. That was interesting. I'm gonna bring the full panel back. So at this segment, I sort of kind of guessed at a subject matter, and I guessed about 3 weeks ago that'd be interesting to discuss a nation divided. And I think when you look at both the presentations of Gino and Mike earlier on, and now of Tim and Christina, it becomes clear when you have these conversations, and as Paul's still with us out in Cyberland. Did Paul leave? Did we lose Paul? But okay, I hear him. There he is. It becomes more clear, I think, when you have these discussions with people and you watch them on TV or you see them, live and in person, that there are two very different visions of what the future should be, and B, what's really going on right now. And I think that makes for discussions. One of the questions I have is, is this election cycle going to change this, or is it going to exasperate it? And I'd like to start with Dr. Sarasik on that one. When you see these conversations by intelligent people having kind of just different versions of what's going on, what are you left with?
Well, I mean, first of all, we've had debates for a long time, and candidates debating. There's nothing unhealthy about candidates arguing with each other, debating. That's why we call them debates. Yep. So I don't think that's a symptom necessarily of something wrong with the system. We do have divisions on issues. We've had divisions for a long time in this country. And, when important things have come up, we've managed to come together. I think a lot of things might depend upon what the overall election looks like, what the overall result looks like. For example, will we continue to have, a divided Congress between Republicans controlling the Senate, Democrats controlling the House of Representatives, right now a Republican controlling the White House, the presidency? Will we have unified government, Republicans in all branches or Democrats in all branches? That'll make a difference as to how much kind of gets done and what happens over the next 2 years or over the next 4 years. And we don't know, what that result is going to be right now. Hopefully as a nation, at least among the most politically active, we can dial down the rhetoric a little bit after the election. I'm not hopeful in part because social media, Mark, I don't want to criticize, your business, but at least on the television end of it, there's more money to be made in fighting than informing sometimes. And that has, I think, fanned the flames a little bit in this country. And it really would help, I think, if we dialed it back a little bit after the election. Whether or not that'll happen, hard to say. We seem to be in permanent campaign mode in this country where we sort of don't stop to govern. We keep going, fighting with each other. Maybe we'll reach, the stage where people just are tired of it. And at least for a while, we can come together. We have some real challenges in this country, and not just domestically. We have some real international challenges that we're going to be facing in the coming years. Unfortunately, that's the kind of thing that sometimes unifies us, but for kind of a bad reason. So let's hope we don't have something, awful happening that does end up unifying us.
And I'll turn to our representative of the Republican Party and Democrat Party to my left here at the standby. When I'll start with Ron first. Ron, when you kind of hear this, very, very clear divide in views of not just what the future should look like, but what the present currently is, what does that tell you about, where we are, and is the election going to have much of an effect on that?
Well, I'm hoping, too, that as we look towards the future, that this election, and as we move forward, is going to bring back some of the ability. I mean, I've been in partisan politics for 45 plus years. I have great friends on both sides of the aisle. I mean, Tom and his wife were at my daughter's wedding. And
was he invited?
Tom McCabe and his wife were at my daughter's wedding, and we've remained friends over years. One of my strongest colleagues is my work wife, Stephanie Penrose, who every day, in a bipartisan fashion, we get a job done. And Tom does the same thing with Joyce in Mahoning County. Then you look at some of the deep division between the aisle, and it's kind of a saddening note. And I would love to see this election bring back a camaraderie, going back to Tip O'Neill when things got done with both parties doing the word called governing, because they're not doing it these days. It'd be great in our time to see that happen again.
Tom, what do you think?
I think elections have a way of resetting things. I think regardless of who wins, whether it's Biden or Donald Trump, we move on. I've been involved with the election since 1988. This is my 6th presidential election I've run as a director at the Board of Elections. And, every 4 years we hear this is the most important election of our lifetime, and then we move on to the next 4 years. And I think we're going to have a winner sooner rather than later in November, and it won't be long before the media in January is talking about 2024 and who the hopeful Democrat is or who the hopeful Republican is. I think there is a little more divide right now, but I think it's social media. I think it's a 24-hour news cycle, and I think right now we are polarized, but the pendulum swings in politics. And I believe after this election, as always, election's almost cleansing. That we move on. The supporters of the winning candidate will gloat for a few days. The supporters of the losing candidate will wallow in their misery for a few days, and then we pick ourselves back up and we move on and keep fighting with each other.
But Paul, after the Obama election, we saw the rise of the Tea Party, which was sort of a rallying factor, and then after the Trump inauguration, you saw the Women's March on Washington, and that sort of movement become this part of the political conversation. I just lost Paul. Do we imagine do we imagine for a second that President Trump, if he loses, will no longer do do rallies and stop tweeting?
No, I don't think we can imagine that. And the rallies may become sort of the new kind of Tea Party movement. Am I muted?
No, you're fine. You're fine. I don't have a screen where I'm at, so.
Okay. The opposition party The unusual thing, I think, in 2016 was, you kind of don't even wait till the inauguration, right? Or it's right at the inauguration that you have, the resistance forming and the Women's March. So it was very, very quick. It took a little while for the Tea Party to sort of wind itself up. And that does show a change in politics, that right away the other side is positioning themselves in opposition.
Right.
The resistance. And then you had, on the other side of it, right, when President Obama gets elected, you have Mitch McConnell on the other side saying basically his duty is to go against most of what President Obama is trying to obtain. So both parties are kind of doing this, see themselves more sort of in an obstructionist mode. And I think that's kind of the problem and what's very frustrating to the American people. The really interesting thing is when you look at polling data and you find out that the people are not nearly as divided as the public officials are and the political activists are. There's actually a lot of agreement on a lot of issues in this country. It just doesn't seem to work its way into our politics.
And do you gentlemen, I'll start with Tom this time, do you see that as well? I think Paul makes a good point. Do you see more where people are really more on the same page and not on the extremes that you see sort of reflected sometimes on, I'll pick on cable news?
Yeah, I still think this country has a vast middle. This country is still more of a center-right country. I think you have extremes on both sides of the party and with supporters. But at the end of the day, I think Ron touched on it, that we have a long-standing relationship. I have Democrat friends. I have family members that are Democrats. We still sit at the same dinner table. I think this country, we still have more in common with each other than differences. And I think if you take politics out of it and who you support for president, I think there's a lot of commonality, and I think there's still civility in politics for the most part. We're just seeing a unique cycle with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and billions of dollars being spent on both sides. And I think after November 3rd, we all come back together like we do every 4 years.
And I think, and Ron probably has already spoken this a little bit too, I think it might be good for people to show up at the Board of Elections and see people from both parties working together before, during, and after the election. I mean, that's...
I'm not sure people, I talked to quite a few people, they don't really know that the Board of Elections is made up of an equal balance. The directors are of opposite parties. Every employee, whether it's Vinton County where they only have directors, or Cuyahoga County where they have 200 employees, there's a balance of those two parties, the two major parties, as well as every poll worker in the state of Ohio when they're working on election day, there's a balance of those poll workers from the two major parties. And you know what, they get along and they administer elections extremely well. I've worked with Tom at the Mahoning County Board of Elections. I know how well they get along, and we have the same relationships in Trumbull County now.
And sometimes in the crossfire of daily headlines, and I'll pick on the president for a moment, he says, well, that state's run by a governor, we can't trust those results. But the governor, I don't think DeWine comes into the office that often in terms of where you gentlemen work. So the other reality is that is actually, the Joyces and the Rons and the Toms, that's where the work is done. Can you just speak to that? Who wants to grab that one? Tom?
Well, sure. I haven't seen Governor DeWine the last year and a half, so. But we have a great Secretary of State. Frank LaRose, I think, has done a great job of bringing bipartisanship into the process and looking at all sides of the issue. But like Ron said, we have, like Mahoning County, we have 14 employees. There's 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats. Each of the counties have 4 board members. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and everything that's done at the board is done in a bipartisan fashion with a Republican and Democrat presence. And I've been fortunate, as we had lines at the Board of Elections for early voters, to go out there and talk to Trump supporters and Biden supporters standing next to each other, and they're getting along. They're waiting in line. It's a 20, 25-minute wait, but we don't see that animosity at the local level like we're seeing maybe at the national level and in other places. But I think it's great if you come down to the Board of Elections, you see that bipartisanship and the parties working together to get something done.
And just by way of reminder, the Secretary of State is from which party?
He's a Republican this time, right? So I think that's why I think he's doing a great job. Ron?
Although some of the Republicans think he's a Democrat at times. No, and Secretary LaRose is doing a wonderful job. He's made some alterations in the short term he's been there, which is just close to 2 years now, and they work for the betterment. There's no doubt about it.
Well, we're going to move on to our next segment, if the stand-ball staff is ready to go. We are our last breakout section, and I've got people talking in my ear a little bit saying, make sure that the candidates don't crosstalk. So Tim and Christina, we appreciate their enthusiasm, but we don't want any crosstalk. So the final breakout section of the evening is the Mahoning State's Attorney Prosecutors race, and they're going to make their pitches. Paul Gaines is the incumbent Democrat. Paul was first elected prosecutor in 1996. Before that, he was an attorney, Youngstown patrolman, and worked as a steel worker. Since his election, he's overseen hundreds of cases from murder to corruption and works as the county's attorney. His opponent, Marty Desmond, he's a Republican. Marty has 18 years of experience in criminal justice with employment by the FBI, the Mahoning County Juvenile Court, and an assistant prosecutor with Mahoning County. He has been a lawyer since 2004 in private practice and has an accounting degree. So I'll begin this segment like we began the previous two. With less than 2 weeks ago before the election, for all those voters who have yet to make up their minds, what is your best 2-minute pitch? We will begin with the incumbent, Mr. Gaines.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetwood. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My experience as a Youngstown police officer, private practicing attorney, and as your prosecutor make me uniquely qualified to be reelected. Because of my integrity, the mafia put a contract out on my life. I survived the shooting, or to keep me from taking office. Fortunately, I survived the shooting. Since then, we've prosecuted nearly 31,000 felonies during my years in office, and we send violent offenders to prison. Prison commitments increased from 185 the year before I took office to nearly 1,000 or more every year since, making this a safer community. I represent every county official, county board, and all 14 townships. Last year, we worked on over 3,500 contracts, opinions, and cases. Keeping the legal work in-house results in saving millions of dollars annually, making that money available for other vital services like police, fire, and the jail. Sadly, my opponent lacks the integrity and the experience necessary for this position. He claims to be a career prosecutor, but does he tell you that I fired him? Unlike my opponent, I am also an experienced civil litigator, having appeared in both state and federal courts as your Mahoning County prosecutor. My opponent has never appeared as an attorney in federal court because he is not licensed to appear there. His only appearance in federal court was as a plaintiff when he sued the FBI after he was not permitted to graduate from the FBI Academy. He did work for the FBI as a civilian employee, but he doesn't tell you, and he didn't tell me, that he testified that he was fired by the FBI in his lawsuit against the Justice Department. He brags that he led the drug task force, but the truth is, Mr. Desmond was never in a supervisory position. He was merely an assistant assigned to the task force to prosecute their cases. Now more than ever, we need public officials we can trust.
All right.
My only instruction to my staff is to follow the law.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. Marty?
Thank you.
2 minutes, same question.
Yep. I grew up in Youngstown, tough area of town. Experienced firsthand the effects of violent crime, gangs, drugs, corruption have on our community. My first memories include a neighborhood friend being shot and killed when I was 6 years old, being offered drugs when I was 9 years old. I'm a victim of violent crime myself. I was kidnapped, robbed, and nearly murdered by a serial rapist who had been stalking my mother. I do have 18 years in law enforcement. Despite what my opponent lies about, I actually was appointed to the special agent position. I have the official FBI documentation here, 2 pages of it, and his claim that I was fired is absolutely false. What had happened is, because of that incident where I was held at gunpoint and nearly killed, the day before I graduated from the academy, after successfully completing all of the training, they told me I could not graduate because I showed signs of PTSD. I filed a lawsuit. I resigned. Here's the official FBI documentation signifying that I did resign, as well as the documentation of my resignation letter that my client or my opponent lies about. In addition to that, here's the actual transcript of what was taking place in that. It does not say that I lied. What it said is that after I tendered my resignation, they came back and offered me my job back. And I said, I don't want my job back. And they said, well, if you don't take your job back, then you're removed. And what I testified to is I took that as I had already resigned. Why would I take my job back? So his lies are just growing by the minute. And quite frankly, how can you trust a guy like Paul Gaines, who on the record has lied under oath? Okay, this is an individual who has taken nearly $20,000 from people involved in organized criminal behavior, public corruption, other crimes. People have been convicted of it. Now, this is a guy you cannot trust. He claims that he took on the mob. He identified the janitor at the courthouse as the person who shot him, not a mob hitman. It was the FBI that I was working for at the time that took down the mob, not Paul Gaines. As far as being the proper candidate for the job, I do have more experience than him. I have more criminal trials than him. I've prosecuted more appeals than him. I've handled more courtroom time than him, more cases before the grand jury.
And that's 2 minutes.
And I also have more integrity and dedication than him.
Thank you both. I have to say, on behalf of the voters, I was kind of hoping when I envisioned these pitches to be more about you than your opponent, but I'll
take it. Period. That's what lawyers do.
For the record, we're not cross-talking. So I'll continue with my follow-ups. And as we do this, Marty, the challenger, goes first. Marty, in your role as assistant prosecutor of Mahoning County, you were perceived as threatening a reporter with prosecution for doing his job covering a case in open courtroom. If you win, how can Valley Media be assured you will not interfere with coverage in such a way again?
Yeah, what had happened is it wasn't necessarily a threat. I had received words. We were in the middle of a complex trial that I had led. I was actually tapped to investigate a large-scale drug organization that was responsible for multiple murders. And during the trial of two of the hitmen, I had received a phone call from another assistant prosecutor that a reporter was going to be publishing the list of confidential informants from the task force. And that was the only information that I was given. I reached out to him and said, why would you publish a list of confidential informants putting people's lives in danger? In that particular case, we had already had one witness executed, and we had one who was on the run because he was being threatened. I told him that I am not going to permit him to put witnesses and victims' lives in danger. That's what prosecutors do. I told him that if I had to go to the court to seek a gag order, I would do that. And if he violated it, I would seek to hold him in contempt of court. And that if his actions were so reckless to put people's lives in danger that people were killed, I would seek further legal action against him. Because as a prosecutor, my job first and foremost is to protect the community, not to sell newspapers. Okay, I apologize that I'm not politically correct because I'm a prosecutor. That's what prosecutors do, is they protect society. And this prosecutor, Mark, you called me after I explained the situation to you. There was a little bit of a miscommunication from what I was told by another assistant prosecutor versus what was actually done. You know as well as I do, I have always been open and forefront with the media. I have always held press conferences when I've made large-scale arrests and prosecutions as the lead prosecutor for the Drug Task Force and Violent Crime Task Force. Okay, despite what Mr. Gaines says, decisions at the task force as far as charging were mine and mine only. And you'll recall, and you can go to my website, desmond2020.com, there are scores and scores and scores of newspaper articles where I gave full access to the case, to the media. I believe in transparency, but if transparency means putting people's lives in danger, I'm not going to have it happen. And so I believe first and foremost, my job is to protect people and to protect this society. You can talk to any other reporter that you know. I'm always open, honest. I show them everything, including bringing with me tonight the documentation, the official documentation that shows Mr. Gaines is lying.
All right, thank you.
Including his perjury.
We're still at 2 minutes. Mr. Gaines, in the last decade or so, a lot of the corruption investigations in the county have come from outside the county. As I mentioned at the top of your introduction, you're also the county's attorney, and in fact, you're attorney for many, aspects of other county organizations and government. Does your role as county attorney hamper you from initiating investigations in cases in which you might detect some corrupt or corrosive activity in county government? Is there a perception of a conflict there?
Well, there are two types of conflicts, Mr. Sweetwood. There's the one where there's an actual ethical conflict, and you petition the court. The pivotal case on that is State Ex-Relator Henderson versus Thomas, and that's where if the prosecutor has an actual conflict, he or she would bring in a special prosecutor. You request the court to appoint the prosecutor, and the court would appoint the prosecutor. The elected prosecutor would have no supervisory authority. The other type is a statutory designation of a special prosecutor. I have done both. The actual conflict was one involving Marty Yavorsik, who Mr. Desmond claims gave me money, and he did. And I actually testified against him in Cleveland in the court case against him. So if they give me money, I don't care. I appointed the special prosecutors to prosecute all those individuals in his commercial. We didn't know that they were being investigated or prosecuted when they contributed, and I directed those prosecutors to follow the evidence and to take whatever action they deem appropriate. And that's the way it was. Now, with regard to your question about Mr. Gorman, that is not the way I remember your telephone call to me with Mr. Gorman.
I'm trying desperately not to be involved in this.
I'm sorry?
So I'm trying desperately not to be involved in this.
I understand that, but you are, and you know what occurred. You know what Mr. Gorman told you, and you know what you told me, and that is not what Mr. Desmond said it was, and those facts are not accurate, as I'm sure you recall. So please, Mr. Desmond, quit deceiving these good people.
Let's have a debate then, Paul. Why are you declining to debate me? Let's have a debate where we can hash these things out, because I have documentation to support everything I say.
Thank you, sir.
Excuse me.
Are we finished now?
I hate to quote President Reagan, but these are my microphones. But thank you. Obviously it's a contentious race. Both have websites readers can go to and get more information. I do know that tomorrow on MahoningMatters.com is not only Justin Dennis's story interviewing both candidates about this race, but also if you go to click on the tab at the top of MahoningMatters.com, you can find the voter's guide, and you can find out answers to the questionnaire that we sent out to both of them, and we thank them both for taking part and speaking to the public tonight. We really do appreciate their participation. Thank you, gentlemen.
You are quite welcome.
Do you want this official FBI documentation that Mr. Gaines is lying about? He has it. I provided it to him about 2 years ago.
Marty,
so if you'd like it, I'll gladly give it to you afterwards.
Marty, have you ever been thrown off the stand-ball stage before?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Standing up for rights.
All right. Jess Harden will grab your documents if you're so inclined. Well, it's live. All right. Well, I do appreciate them, coming by. I mean, obviously, there's a lot to cover there in 10 minutes. But one of the things, and I think Paul is joining us again. Back to the panel. One of the things that I find interesting, at least in this election cycle versus election cycles in the past in Mahoning County, is there is a slate of Republican candidates, and Tom can probably speak to that. I think that's actually, at the end of the day, better for democracy. It's good for people to be tested. There was a period here, and Mr. Gaines is sort of the outlier. He has had competition more than I think the average person has since he was elected. But in general, like in the case of Sheriff Green right now, not that they're doing a bad job and they need to be run out of office, but isn't it better for our society to have opponents test each other every few years? What do you think, Tom?
I think I've said for years, I've been involved with politics for 30 years locally, and I'm not speaking as an election official right now, but more, I guess, as party chairman of the Republican Party. And I've always said a true two-party system helps a community. Years ago, remember George Magazine was out there. It was John F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh, yeah.
And he listed the top 10 places of corruption in the United States. And the one thing in common with all 10 of those communities was one-party domination of politics. And I think what we're seeing is a two-party system growing in this county. I think we have some really good candidates locally. We're seeing some spirited debate between the prosecutor's race, the commissioner's race, and I think that helps a community.
What do you think there, Ron?
Well, we don't have as many of these races as Tom has, forged good candidates here in Mahoning County. We don't have as many of these types of races in Trumbull County. You mentioned Sheriff Green. Sheriff Monroe has the same level of wonderful, outstanding service to Trumbull County as Jerry Green does here in Mahoning, and I think both parties look at that when they're deciding whether they're going to seek a candidate to serve. And a lot of the candidates that sit in offices in Trumbull County have been stellar office holders. So you have very little opposition in the Trumbull County races.
Paul, are you seeing, Dr. Sarasik, are you seeing a resurgent in sort of the two-party system in Mahoning County, and does that bode well?
Party competition. And what this is sort of symbolizing is the real kind of realignment that we're seeing, in American politics. Look, when I first arrived in Youngstown in the early 1990s, there was barely a Republican Party, right? It was a Democratic Party. If you wanted to vote in a primary, you voted Democratic because that was the only primary available to you. And, I think, Tom is right that the competition is a good thing and it's very healthy. One of the things we've seen, though, is the Republican Party has really kind of moved into Democratic issues, particularly with the trade issue in 2016. That was a Democratic issue for years. It still is. If you hear, Congressman Ryan speaking or Senator Brown. But now the Republicans have also grabbed that issue, and that's an attractive issue in the Valley. You're seeing, working class voters who traditionally have been Democratic because of labor unions moving over. So we're sort of the side effect of that is to bring, I think, political competition to the Valley for the first time really since the 1920s.
And did anyone, by the way, hear anything tonight that struck them one way or the other, or were you completely bored did anybody, pick up something tonight that you hadn't heard before, or were you struck by anything that came out of the conversation? And since we're all looking at Ron, we'll go with Ron.
Yeah, we'll go with Ron.
Yeah, we're going with Ron first on this one. Thanks, Tom. That's a nice diversion tactic. As an elections administrator, as an elections official, I mean, I've taken pretty strong oath of trying to stay out of the political limelight these days. As I mentioned earlier, I have spent 45 years in bipartisan politics, and I'm trying to take a little lower level seat. So watching what went on here this evening, none of it surprised me, but on the other hand, I mean, it would have been probably a more enlightened evening had we had some girth to the matter. Mahoning matters, by the way.
All right, that's fair. How about you, Tom?
I think we touched on this already. We saw a very spirited debate at the congressional level that we haven't seen in years. We saw a spirited debate in the prosecutor's race. I think you could have had some of the commissioner candidates here, maybe even the recorder candidates. We have judge candidates, a state rep candidate. So
I don't know, organizing this was enough fun.
We could do another one next week. I'm free. And so I guess my takeaway is what we touched on is I think there's a lot of interest, not only at the presidential level, but down to the local level too, that's helping drive turnout.
Paul, anything to add to that?
First of all, I want to compliment Tom and Ron for sort of their really exhibiting the bipartisan nature of our election boards in Ohio. And I think sometimes we kind of take this for granted. It's been kind of a long day for me today. It started at 7:30 doing a video lecture to Bangladesh. And, when you look into what's going on and the questions that I got sort of from the Zoom audience, in Bangladesh is sort of about the integrity of the system. They're a very new democracy, and they look to us kind of to model how you run elections, how you have a functioning democracy. And I emphasized actually during my lecture how we do it in Ohio. with Republicans and Democrats on the board. So it really, really made me feel good to hear both Tom and Ron emphasizing that tonight. And I think sometimes as a nation, we don't emphasize that enough. We talk about our divisions, but not the kinds of things we do well. And I think elections, at least in Ohio, are among those things that we do really well and do model for the world. So thank you.
And we'll go around the horn one more time. Any final thoughts as we head into the last 13 days? We'll start with you again, Paul.
Well, I guess sort of to go back to what I said, but maybe take it to a national level. We are a model democracy, and I sometimes think that we forget that because we've all inherited a very comfortable system. A system that's made our nation, very wealthy and very stable for more than 200 years. And I think we take that for granted. I don't want to go on for too long, but, Senator Moynihan once talked on the floor of the United Nations. He was ambassador to the United Nations, and he pointed out that someone from a developing democracy had talked to him once and said, he complained that the United States was always trying to build democratic institutions around the world. But he said, Senator Moynihan, you never tell us the one secret that makes American democracy work. And he said, and that secret is, how do you trust each other? Because trust is so necessary in a democracy. And that kind of goes back to, what I said earlier about Tom and Ron, as being an integral part of this system. We have to trust, sort of the electoral system. So I'd remind, everybody kind of about that as we move through 2020, that we are modeling for the world. And it was important.
That's good to hear. Tom, any last thoughts? Last 13 days?
Well, I think, talking to the voters out there, there's still plenty of time to get out there and participate in the system. There's no excuse in Ohio. It's one of the easiest states to cast your ballot and the access to that ballot. So we still have those 12, 13 days left to vote early. We still have election day when we're going to be there fully manned. And assuring those voters that, participate. And there's a lot of resources out there, forums like this, that if you're still undecided on races or what races are out there, get informed and get out there and cast your ballot.
Ron, despite everything else, I'm going to give you the last word.
I appreciate it. First off, Doc, you hit the nail on the head, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Ohio does elections well. There was a bad view of Ohio's elections some 20 years ago or so, and you know what it's done? It's done a 180. It's one of the more stellar systems in the country. It should be a model for the rest of the states. People showed a fear, and you see it on the evening news or the national news regarding the US Postal Service or mailing ballots or something of that nature. But truth be told, we do this every election. Every single election, Ohio opens up its gates for 29 days or so, and we have early voting. Not just this one, every election. And we mail ballots every election. You asked about the relationships with the US Postal Service. Tom mentioned touch and base. We touch base every single day with our local postal service. But, and Tom would reiterate this, that we have communications with the Postmaster General out of Cleveland, Sarita Montgomery, and she keeps us in complete loops on timelines. Our mail is it's so colorful right now that you can't not know that it's a piece of elections mail. We do it right, and it's we would love. There's no difference. We use the same type of systems in Trumbull and Mahoning County. If it was 100% turnout, it wouldn't make for too much longer of an evening for Tom and I on November 3rd because of the systems we use. So we look forward to this. This is the business we've chosen.
Well, and we have to thank all of our guests tonight, both Dr. Sarasik and Tom and Ron here at the Standball, all of our guests who joined us throughout the evening with Gino and Michael, and with Tim and Christina and Paul and Marty, who I hope have stopped debated. I'm not sure. And we thank you. Community Matters is sort of our process where we hope to bring discussions that are important to the community to you and help you be a part of them. I didn't get to a lot of your questions tonight. I tried to get to as many as possible, but we do appreciate everyone kind of watching tonight and for weighing in. We couldn't do this without the wonderful Stambaugh Auditorium staff. So they are wonderful, and we also could not do this without you out there in the audience and the people who read our newsletters and send questions ahead. It really means everything to us. And if this mission to keep our community connected, informed matters to you, once again, I ask maybe consider making a one-time donation or a monthly contribution in support of community journalism that we do every day at MahoningMatters.com. We thank you for joining us. We thank our panel, Matt, Courtney, Travis, everyone here who's kept this thing going all night. And this was quite an interesting production to watch from my end. And we wish you all a very good night, and let's all be careful out there. Thank you.
Boy, it's a good thing I wore the pens.
Oh, my.
Well,
the